Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Wow, we have a great interview for you right now. Wait till you hear about this. It's an honor to have on the phone Major General David Fraser. He's retired. He's one of Canada's most decorated generals since World War II. He was the commander of Operation Medusa in Afghanistan, and he's written about it. Of course, the book is titled Operation Medusa, The Furious Battle That Saved Afghanistan from the Taliban. And before we say hello, let me brag about the book a little bit. I found it on Amazon, and on Amazon it is currently #1 in the category of province and local Canadian history. It's number 6 in the category of 20th century books. It's number 6 also in the military history category, and it's number 7 in province and local, and it's only been out since May 8th. That's pretty impressive. It's an honor to say good morning, Major General David Fraser. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Wow, this is some story, and I'm so glad you're the one telling it too, by the way.
Well, listen, thanks very much. And, Brian Hannington and myself, their co-author, we really wanted to sort of tell a story about some great heroism, sacrifice, teamwork, about Canadians and Americans in a battle that not many people have actually studied, but it's something that everyone should study. It's studied widely in the U.S. Military now because it was one of these battles, A, that we never thought we were going to go and fight, B, we shouldn't have won, but we did.
Why shouldn't we have won it?
Well, we went over there to fight an insurgency and build a nation, but what the Taliban did was in the fall of 2006, they brought 500 fighters, which they had never done before or since. Their top 10 commanders from the southern provinces and including Pakistan to take on the international coalition because they didn't think politically or militarily they had the wherewithal to fight.
Okay, that's an important statement right there. They didn't think they had the wherewithal to fight.
No.
Does that start at the top and trickle down to the soldier on the field?
Absolutely. So, this was NATO's biggest fight ever. So they'd never been in a battle in their entire history like this. Canada hadn't been in a battle since World War II or Korea with the UN, and so what the Taliban assessed was they didn't think anyone was going to be up to the muster to do this, and at the time we didn't have the right resources to do this, so we were really scrambling to try to put it all together. And this is what the book talks about. It talks about relationships and about what the American Special Forces did, what the United States Army and the Air Force did to pull this all together to actually scramble to take on the biggest battle that any one of us had ever had.
Yeah, it might be a minor point of the book, but I think it does make the point that NATO is an important organization. I seem to remember our president saying we wanted to get out of NATO, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, maybe you shouldn't say things like that. It just seems like a good thing to be part of. So,
well, NATO is a good organization. It's a military and a political structure, but Medusa really demonstrated some of the weaknesses of NATO. That you've got those members that do all the heavy lifting: Canada, Great Britain, United States, but there are a lot of other nations that didn't show up to the fight. And we talk about that in the battle, and that's where I think the readers need to see what the president and what other nations have done behind the scenes. Your president does right in the people's faces.
Wow.
An attack on one means an attack on all, and that means everyone's got to pull their weight together.
Yeah. Oh, well said.
And what some people don't realize is that you just weren't fighting and protecting, but you were also constructing. You built schools and bridges and irrigation ditches, and which was brought out in the book, which is pretty amazing.
It absolutely. This is part of the story that a lot of people just don't know, is that, we spent more time building and schools, roads, cleaning out ditches and creating irrigation to build an economic structure so that those men and women over there called Afghans could say to us, "Thanks very much, but please leave. We want to do this ourselves." But the Taliban kept destroying it. Everything we built, they would destroy.
So it was 12 years ago. Tell us what was happening 12 years ago, and I use that as a way to kind of let the listener know what the book is about. The book is the Furious Operation Medusa, the furious battle that saved Afghanistan from the Taliban.
So 12 years ago, the Canadians battalion had just shown up, completely combat untested. NATO had just taken over the South, not combat tested in a great sense compared to what the American-led coalition Operation Enduring Freedom was. So that's the political situation. Politically at stake were, a minority government of Stephen Harper in Canada, the Great Britain, and the Netherlands. Had they actually wavered at this point in time, political questions would have been raised there. NATO's credibility would have been questioned. Canada's credibility internationally would have been questioned. And our relationship with an Afghan nation called, when they asked us to come in, had we not succeeded in this fight, our relationship with Afghans in the Muslim world would have been questioned.
Right, and that's an important part of this too, isn't it? Because when we hear sometimes about our soldiers being over in Afghanistan or other countries, it's not the government or the country that we're fighting. It's like ISIS and Taliban. It's groups like that, isn't it?
We were fighting a philosophy. We were fighting. It's no different than fighting the ISIS philosophy, the Al-Qaeda philosophy. This was the Taliban philosophy. They were a bunch of thugs at the grassroots level, really, really smart, determined, mean, evil people at the top, trying to intimidate, use the people for their own political means. And we were on the other side trying to do this. And so what Medusa did was, this was a battle for all the marbles at that time. Our aim was not to win. Our aim was not to lose. So by not losing, we actually bought time for the peace process to evolve and to germinate to where today they're now talking about a peace process that's inclusive of the Taliban.
And they
if we had lost,
this.
Yes. If we had lost back then, we wouldn't be here today.
Was drugs part of this as well?
I'm sorry, say again?
Was drugs part of this as well?
Drugs was the underlying fuel for this entire insurgency. It was about a $3 billion a year enterprise back then. We talk about it in the book. If anyone says the Afghans can't run a country, I'd say that's actually crap, because they're running in the background a $3 to $5 billion enterprise that's fueling terrorism, that's fueling drug lords and whatnot. And this was actually where the money came from that they used to fight Afghans and our soldiers.
Wow. Where does the word Medusa come from? Why is it called Operation Medusa?
Well, my task force was called Aegis, and Aegis was actually a protectorate. It was a teacher, and Aegis, the CEO of Aegis actually slayed Medusa. So our biggest battle was we just took a little piece of history to say Medusa had a head of snakes, right. And this was probably the biggest ball of snakes we'd ever seen. And
all of the men and women that were involved with the different operations, you also had different names for those operations as well.
Absolutely. Everyone had a different name for their organizations. Every operation we had a name for it, and it's just how militaries just keep everything straight.
What was explain the connection between the Battle of Panjawi and Operation Medusa?
They're actually one and the same. Panjwai is actually the region where the fight took place. Historically, it's the region where Afghans have always fought the invaders. They fought Alexander the Great. They fought the British 3 times. They fought the Soviets there. They took us on in Panjwai, and we just put a title on top of that, which was called Medusa, because we've been fighting in Panjwai. Well, the Americans fought there before we got there. We were fighting there. People after us, Panjwai is just a really bad neighborhood. You don't want to buy a house there.
Was it obvious that this was a turning point, or was that not so obvious until you were looking back at it sometime later?
No, in August of that year, we knew that this was a turning point. Something had changed, because we were getting reports in from the Afghans that there was an infiltration of Taliban, and also because of the fighting. And historically, it just made a lot of sense of why they would pick this ground. But the turning point really was when NATO came in, the Taliban's assessment that NATO wouldn't fight and the international coalition, and Canada wouldn't fight.
Was everything supported from the ground, or did you have air support as well?
Probably the best air support I've ever had in my entire military career. A guy named Dutch Holland was running the air operations out of LUD in Qatar. He was responsible for Iraq and Afghanistan. And during Medusa, we were the number one priority between the two theaters. And I remember at one stage in the book looking up and seeing F-18s flying overhead, and those came off the Gulf off an aircraft carrier. And if it wasn't for the air support that we had, again, the results might have been a little bit different.
Tell me about Charles Company. What is that?
Well, Charles Company is a company that came out of the 1st Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment out of Petawawa. They were the actual main battalion doing the fighting, and Charles Company was one of their subunits. On the 3rd of September, they attacked into the objective on Panjwai. The attack initially went well, but then they got counter-ambushed by the Taliban, and they lost 4 soldiers on that attack. We regrouped the next day to do it again, and that's when we were hit by a friendly fire where we lost 1 soldier and 34 wounded. And so we had Charles Company was completely taken out of the battle because they'd lost all their commanders, and we had to rejig the plan because Omar Lavoie lost 25% of his combat power over those 2 days.
You also honor the fallen in your book.
Absolutely. I lost 35 Canadians during my time over there, 79 coalition forces, but Canada lost 162 Canadians throughout the 12 years that we were in Afghanistan. And quite frankly, this is a book and a tribute to all nations who have sent over their future, their men and women who sacrificed and had their lives taken for the provision of hope and opportunity you and I take for granted. And this book really talks about their heroism, their sacrifice. And politicians send this, but it's the men and women that actually do the heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely. The life for the everyday Afghanistan citizen is I'm sure today better than it would have been had you not done what you did. Is it as good as it can be, though? I mean, it seems like they still got a long way to go.
It is better than it was. There's a tremendous road ahead. I mean, I look at this country as being only 17 years old when it was formed. I mean, our countries are so much older. But this country is going to have to pick up its own socks and have to do more, for themselves and not just rely on us. The international community, right. The United States. We can't solve this for them. They have to solve it for themselves.
You also have a chapter in there titled Slaughter, trying to help the soldiers that were wounded.
Yeah, absolutely. This book in part will help answer the questions of what happened and why things happened above them. There are a lot of men and women around the world who are wounded to this day, both physically and mentally. And, whatever we can do to help them, there's nothing less. Our nations can't do enough for these men and women that, stand on guard for our nation so that we can just take the liberties that we look at as commonplace. But in part, this book is to raise awareness about what our men and women need from our governments.
The world at large typically is always somehow hoping that we can have a war and there won't be any civilian casualties, and yet that's almost impossible. I guess in today's battlefield, I guess you can be precision to the point where you can minimize that. But how did we do as far as civilian casualties in our involvement in Afghanistan at least 12 years ago?
Military spent so much of their time with rules of engagement, collateral damage assessment, trying to mitigate the risk to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, airwomen, and to the local nationals, the innocent people, and trying to minimize that risk, but you can't bring it down to zero. And we keep working on it. We use precision-guided munitions. We use procedures. And as much as we did that, we weren't always successful in Afghanistan. The enemy, being the bastards that they are, will nestle right in beside a civilian house or civilian school or civilian hospital to make it even harder for us to prosecute. But in the end, we need to do what we need to do, and sometimes mistakes happen.
How did the individual soldiers under your command keep focused during that battle?
It's absolutely amazing. You tell them what to do and why they are doing it. When they understand and believe what they are doing, that person standing beside them, they will work as a team. Their buddies will work together, and they will do everything they have in their power because it's belief. Absolute passion and belief of what they're doing actually is making a difference. And irrespective of what politicians said, if you want to find out the ground truth, go talk to a man and woman on the battlefield. They'll tell you what is working, what's not working, but also what they believe in. And during this fight, they believed what they were doing was the right thing. And the rest of it was pretty straightforward. It was inspirational from my point of view.
For the listeners, I want to tell you, this is more than an honor. This is unheard of. We speak to authors all the time, and they are either, I mean the nonfiction authors. So we speak to a lot of nonfiction authors all the time, and they're either historians or maybe in one way had worked with the military. But I mean, talking to you is almost like talking to Patton or MacArthur. I mean, you are the guy who made this all happen, and maybe you're too humble to acknowledge that. But everything I read indicates that. How often do we get a book written by somebody in your position? So I really appreciate the fact that you did the book and are doing the radio tour.
Well, listen, I'm humbled by that. I was just absolutely privileged to serve beside some of the best men and women I've ever had the honor of serving with in a circumstance that I hope no one ever has to repeat, because this book is really about their stories.
How about the photographers? Because you always have photographers and reporters in the front lines and things. How did you keep them safe and still focus on what you were doing and have them not get in the way?
Well, it's a great question, because very early on, we made a decision to embed the media inside our organizations, in part because we had nothing to hide. We wanted to make sure that people saw what we were doing and understood what we were doing, and not relate future operations. Number two was we needed to protect them, because the Taliban were looking for people like this to either capture or kill. And so bringing everybody together, we were able to show everybody there was nothing hidden about the story. It was a great story. We needed those men and women to tell the story to the Americans and Canadians and everyone else back home, because they needed to know what their people were doing overseas and why we were doing this stuff. And so in fact, they were a key part of this operation.
Once again, our guest is Major General David Fraser. He's one of Canada's most decorated generals since World War II. He is probably the person to point to as the closest thing to an architect, if there is such a thing, for Operation Medusa in Afghanistan, which basically put an end to Taliban. Is that fair to say, at least at that moment? Bringing some sort of normalcy, I guess, to the average person living in Afghanistan in those years and the years that followed, as a matter of fact. As in your retirement, are you enjoying retirement? It seems like, I mean, all that you did, you must be going stir crazy, or no?
Well, I didn't retire.
You didn't retire? Okay.
No, I got too. Well, I retired from the military, but I've gone on to do other things, because I teach young kids at the University of Western at the Ivy Business School, and I now work in the private sector, because what I've learned about being a leader and working with great men and women, I want to share that with other people and make our organizations competitive and strong for the international world.
I always wondered how you keep supplies coming in when you are fighting battles like that, so your soldiers have everything they need. Well,
the two briefings that took the longest in the morning was my weather forecast, so I could figure out what could fly and what couldn't fly, which affects everything, especially medevac. Number two is logistics. You got to make sure you've got everything there, because you just can't go down to your local Walmart and buy it, because it comes halfway around the world. So we spent an awful lot of time figuring out and stockpiling stuff before we had operations. We had mistakes during Medusa. We almost ran out of ammunition at one stage because someone didn't do the paperwork. That wasn't exactly a fun day when I had to tell people in the field to slow down, and had to phone back home and to say, we got a problem here and I need more ammunition. So it's logistics, and weather and logistics is what leaders contend with today.
What was the defining moment that made you realize it was over?
When we actually started bumping into Afghans and they were running away from us on the field. So initially, the Taliban moved in and they occupied the Afghan houses. And so if your house, some thug would have who would knocked on your door, burst open the door and said, "Get out." And we dropped leaflets to tell the Afghan people that our fight is with the Taliban and not them. As they see us, get out of the way, because we don't want to fight them and we don't want to hurt them. So as we were clearing the objectives, we started coming up against Afghan citizens, and they started running away. So we knew that there was no longer Taliban. We were actually dealing with friendlies. So we said, that's good enough. And in the book, we talk about the 2-4 easting. It's a line on a map I said at that stage in the game, we stopped the attack now because all we see now are friendlies.
You also brought up Les Grau in the book.
Les Grau, what a great writer. I mean, he wrote 2 great books, The Bear Went Over the Mountain, The Other Side of the Mountain, about the history of the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. Afghans are historically driven people, and a lot of what they do every day is you can find in their history. So as part of the education and reading before we went over, we had Les Grau up, talk to all the officers and NCOs about, Afghanistan and the Soviets and the history there. And I actually used the book as a bit of my own intelligence to figure out what was going on the ground because of the history there. And it was very illuminating to help me understand how important this ground called Panjwai was.
The book, again, is called Operation Medusa. I have a copy of the book. If you would like the one copy that was sent to me, call, and I will take a call at random and leave it here for you at the station. So the number is 622-9622. Let me give everybody a moment to call in. I'll try to do this as fair as possible. But if you don't win it, you can buy it. It is available. I found it on Amazon, where it currently is holding the number 1 position in at least one category and the number 6 position in 2 categories, I believe, if I remember right. Do you have a website dedicated to the book or to your writing?
It's just the Amazon site or the Penguin Random House website is got everything on the book.
Are you the voice on the audiobook?
Yes. In fact, Paul Gross, an actor who's done Down South and a number of other things, has just done an audiobook. I've just listened to it this past week. It's awesome, an absolute awesome. So if you're in the car, you want to listen to the story, go get the Paul Gross audiobook.
Let me give away this copy. All right, good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Vernon McIntyre.
Vernon, you got it. It'll be waiting for you here at the station.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being on the air with us, Major General David Fraser. I'm always awkward with titles, so Major General. Last guy I called a lieutenant, he was a colonel. So I don't know. I'm all messed up. Thank you for your work. Thank you for what you were able to accomplish, and for sharing the story. It's good to hear it from the person who actually lived it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
That was an awesome interview. Okay, we will take a little break. We'll be right back. This is WOCA.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. The Secretary of State giving his first major address since being sworn in, taking on Iran.
Strategically, the Obama administration made a